All right. Hello, everybody. This is the first live stream of 2024 for Wall Street Oasis. It's been a while since I've done one of these and I feel bad. So I wanted to hop on today, answer any questions from our audience, from our followers. It is January 3rd, 2024. And we have, happy Friday, everybody. We are streaming on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter/X, and I believe Insta as well. Let me see. I'm a little bit rusty on how to use this, but basically the way this typically works is you can drop a comment in and I should see them. If not, Namir's on here since I have technical difficulties doing this streaming software, but I think it's working from what I can tell. And I think we're live on all those platforms. So as people come in, I think I'm happy to answer any questions specifically around recruiting season. This is a critical time for any sophomores in the audience. So if you are a sophomore in uni or second year in the UK, or basically trying to apply for any sort of internships for the top firms in high finance, this is a critical time since summer 2025 internship applications are already open. So RBC started us off back in September, but now we've seen in December, we saw Houlihan drop, Rothschild, Stout in Chicago. I think JP Morgan just opened and a few others. So I think in terms of getting ready for that, just want to make sure any sophomores out there that that those applications are open. You want to get your resume in as soon as possible, because even though sometimes they'll have a deadline set of February, March, it's not a true deadline. It's rolling. So you want to make sure you're getting in, you're networking properly and all that good stuff. Angelo asks, any tips for the JP Morgan Highview for real estate banking? Highviews, for those of you that aren't aware, are the recorded interviews they make you do in order to submit an application. So when you apply, oftentimes it's automated where you'll just automatically get an invitation to do a Highview. And the way that works is they'll ask you typically a set of questions, anywhere from 2 to 5 questions, usually with a response time of 1 minute up to 3 minutes. And so when you're prepping for these Highviews, I think some of the best things you can do is whichever firm you're doing the Highview for, you must have the obvious question of why this firm ready to go. In terms of how you prepare for Highviews, outside of like a specific Highview simulation you can run, and this is what we do for WSO Academy students. We actually have a Highview simulation where we record them and force them to go through it, because it is very awkward when you're staring into a camera, not like this when you're actually having to do that. It is awkward. So if you're not used to it, it can lead to a lot of ums and no's and likes. And so what I would suggest for all of you that don't have access to a Highview simulation, you should be trying to predict specifically what types of questions they're going to ask you. So for JP Morgan, and specifically real estate banking, you could assume that you're going to be getting why JP Morgan, why real estate, what interests you about real estate. You should have those very much drafted. And part of that in terms of like prepping is having your 7 stories down. So basically knowing exactly how, why JP Morgan makes a lot of sense for you, why real estate interests you ideally from something in your past that you can reference and deliver that story in the Highview. One thing I'll say is you do want to make sure you're at least once recording yourself, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's on just your iPhone, your smartphone, just putting it up and just talking into the camera. Because what you'll find is you probably have a lot of different things you do, whether it's looking away from the camera, whether it's a nervous tick, or whether it's certain patterns in your speech that you're not very aware of. And so make sure you're doing at least 3 to 4 dry runs before you go hit record and do the real thing, because I think that'll just make you that much more polished and deliver a good Highview. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, we got a lot of questions coming in. Okay. This is a good question from Kaiya. Sorry if I mess up your name, Kaiya. How do you approach hypothetical questions like where will the S&P 500 will be at in a year? These types of market-based questions, I think all they're looking for is your thought process. So I think this is basically a question of asking you, how much do you know about macroeconomics? Are you reading the Wall Street Journal? Are you reading the Financial Times? Because in terms of how you approach these questions, I think what you want to do is show a measured viewpoint of, the macroeconomy. What do you think is going to be happening with inflation? What do you think is going to be happening with interest rates? Is inflation going to keep coming down and getting under control, where it allows the Fed to start cutting rates? We've seen job growth really dramatically slow in the last few months, which is kind of given, which is counterintuitively help the stock market recover. I think because it's leading to investors thinking that the Fed's going to be more likely to cut rates earlier in the year and perhaps more aggressively should we have a mini recession or just a weaker labor market, which is what the Fed has kind of been waiting for a long time. So we're starting to kind of finally see that. So I think just having that specific knowledge, reading about the general economy, reading about interest rates, inflation, the Fed, and understanding how those facts kind of impact things will help you kind of basically deliver an informed opinion. And for saying, where exactly will it be? I mean, like, obviously, if I knew exactly where the S&P would be, I'd be, a very wealthy investor. However, in terms of how I'm viewing 2024, you could say, you want to have some sort of informed opinion. You could probably give a range of, I expect it to be a somewhat sideways year. Yes, inflation is coming to control and the Fed may cut rates. However, that could spur, another bout of inflation where they're not able to cut as aggressively as they wanted to. So you could, talk about that and basically show that you understand the interplay between all those macroeconomic variables. So that's how I'd approach it. So yeah, crack open your macroeconomic textbook, basically. Let's see what else we have here. It's a great question from Fadi. I'm a first-year banker after career pivot, currently at a boutique firm, 28. I assume 28 is your age. Any suggestions on the best way to approach going upstream over time? 8 years professional experience in engineering automotive sales. Hi, Fadi. Congrats, first off, on making the pivot. That's like step number one. You're now in the right channel. And so what I would say is if you're in your first year, I'd be wary of trying to make the pivot too early. What I'd be focusing on is doing a great job at your current boutique, number one. And number two, really trying to make sure you're getting on actual live deals, because what dramatically changes your odds is the deal experience you have on your resume. So it's not the size of the deals. It's really, do you have enough transactions? Do you have enough M&A or restructuring or whatever type of firm you're at? Because it's about reps. And basically what happens is if deal activity picks back up at the middle markets, the elite boutiques, the bulge brackets, and they've underhired, that's when they go down and they'll look at transaction advisory services at a big four. They'll look at a analyst at a boutique, and they just want people to come in and be able to hit the ground running. So they very much will give you preference in those type of lateral interviews. Now, what I'll say in terms of how to approach going upstream over time. So let's pretend you've done a full year, you've done a year and a half at the boutique. You have 5 deals under your belt. You have at least 2 deals on your belt. So your resume now is looking more like a traditional banker's resume. In that case, you want to make sure that you don't just start networking as soon as you're ready to make a transition. You want to make sure, ideally, you're always networking. And so what I tell our WSO Academy students is, like, this is something that should be career long. This should be something that you have a wide top of funnel. You're constantly meeting and talking with new people. When I say constantly, it doesn't mean every single day, but ideally 2 to 4 phone calls every single week with people at different firms, with people in different sub-industries and subgroups. And that can even be for people in private equity, even if you know you're not competitive there yet. Planting those seeds and thinking of networking as a long-term relationship building exercise and not a transactional exercise in the short term will pay dividends for you as you're trying to gradually go upstream and get to larger platforms and get to bigger deals and obviously, better career. So that's what I'd suggest. And this kind of leads into this question from Anshul. Is it normal to network mostly after you apply to a firm? I heard some say that you should wait to apply to a firm only after you have networked to avoid being forgotten about. Anshul, it depends on the market. I'm not sure if you're UK or US, but most likely I'm guessing. But I think it's always better to, I always think it's actually better to network well prior, a year prior, 6 months prior. Plant those seeds, establish an initial relationship, even if it's a weak tie, even if it's just a 20-minute conversation, 15-minute conversation, thanking them. Then when you apply, reminding them about the conversation you had and thanking them again and letting them know that you applied. If you made a good impression, then that tends to be a very effective strategy to get your resume pulled and land the first round. And don't get me wrong, like the networking is critical to land those first rounds, and that's the main goal of those. But you have to remember the networking and the value that it's giving to you as just a way to practice your story, as a way to learn more about the industry, the subgroups, the specific, within a specific firm, to learn about like different family offices that you never even considered as a potential option for a career change. So like those calls, you're really getting a lot more value out of it, even if it never leads to a first round interview at a specific firm. So that's how you should be approaching these, is like, you're very grateful to the person for taking those, even 15 minutes out of their super busy day to kind of give you any sort of insight, and to give you any sort of advice that would help you progress. But yeah, I would always say network early. The earlier, the better. It's why we tell our freshmen to please start and not wait till recruiting season, which is right now for sophomores. So for the sophomores that are just joining, I can tell you, the sophomores just joining our program, we are like pushing them 100 miles an hour, because we know if they don't start networking in the next few weeks, their odds of even landing that first round just dramatically plummet. So it's the same thing for you. If you're in that case where like you haven't networked and now it's application season, it doesn't mean you don't do it. You still do it. It's just it's not ideal to do it post application. But yeah, in terms of like timing, you would still, of course, remind the person you had networked with prior that you have applied after the application, and continue to try to network with additional people in that firm, not just the initial contact you made maybe 6 months ago or whatnot. Here we go. From Instagram comments here. I don't know who this is from, but why did recruiting season start very early for 2025? I'm a junior at a top 3 target school. Everyone around me already has offers from top banks. Kind of disappointing. Am I late? I mean, this is just funny just reading this, because yeah, I don't know if you meant recruiting season start very early for 2025. I assume you mean for summer 2025, which is for is currently going on for sophomores. So yeah, if you're at a top 3 target school and you're a junior, yes, you are late, because if you don't get the internship your junior summer, then the odds of you landing a full-time offer are dramatically lower. This reminds me of our odds calculator that we released. I don't know, Amir, if you could throw up a link to the high finance odds calculator. We have something that allows you to say kind of where you are in the whether you're at a target school, a super target, a semi-target, whatnot, but also what year you are, like, or what semester you are. And what happens is after spring sophomore year, and actually starting even earlier by that, but starting spring sophomore year, like right now, in terms of if you're a sophomore, the odds start dropping dramatically in terms of you getting handicapped in terms of getting an offer for full time in a top high finance, in a top investment bank, for example. Simply because if you don't land that summer internship for your junior summer, that's where they're hiring anywhere from 90 to 100% of their full-time hires. And in this past years, there's been almost no lateral, like this last year, there was almost no lateral hires going on, simply because they didn't even give, the typical high offer rates to their interns. Some banks were doing 70 to 80% offer rates rather than the typical 90, 95. So it was a very tough summer 2023. So hopefully this year we see deal volume pick back up, and we have the opposite problem where they realize they've underhired for their interns and they did actually have a pretty robust lateral hiring market. But we'll see how it plays out. A lot of it depends again on inflation and where rates go, and how much deal activity picks back up. See, I'll try to take a few more here. Yeah, and Fadi said, I want to stay in the boutique around 18 to 24 months. Yes, great. Fadi sounds like a good plan. Oh, yes. Steven Mercedes, any tips for first year college students looking to break into investment banking? Yes, talk to investment bankers. as many as possible, as early as possible. If you're a first year, you're not early. You're not early because in exactly 1 year from now, which sounds like a long time, but it's not, you will actually have to be polished on interviews. You will have had to have networked with a bunch of people from different banks. You will have to be basically able to answer technical questions, be really good at behavioral questions. Your resume is going to need to be polished. Ideally, this freshman summer, you have some sort of finance-related internship. I mean, I can tell you the kids we have from NYU have like at least one investment banking internship when they're coming in like freshman year sometimes. So you're competing against the top of the top. I don't know what school you go to, Stephen, but point being, if you want to be competitive, you're going to really want to start early. The people that tell you you have time to explore in college and don't worry about it and figure out what you're really passionate about, that's all great, but they aren't actually aware of the accelerated recruiting timelines. And if you do that and you're waiting till junior year to kind of try and find yourself of what career you want, well, too bad. The ship has sailed, and your odds of now getting into something that would potentially lead to a lot of other optionality for you in your career has now gone away. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't make it. It just means that now you've increased the odds that you're going to need an MBA, a master's to get a reset later in your career, and it just decreases your odds of kind of getting in right away. So my tip is just get on the phone with as many people as you can. And this academy students, we're giving them basic odds, and I'll give you the percentages. Some people do and don't know this, but like in terms of LinkedIn, what they allow you to do, I think they've reduced it. It's about 100 connection requests a week, which sounds like a lot. Oh my gosh, you're going to make me have 100 connection requests with people, but I'm not even ready to talk with people. Well, you're a freshman. They don't expect you to know anything. It's a huge benefit. So actually do it now, because they're going to expect you to know nothing. You can ask really genuine questions around, be curious. Now, ideally, you're reading the forums, any sort of materials you can, so you actually ask a little bit more. After a few months of doing these calls, you actually ask more intelligent questions to start impressing them. But initially, you can just be like, I am completely green. I'm learning. Please be patient with me if I ask a dumb question. I think that can be very appealing to a professional to try and help you. So my point is, in terms of numbers, if you're doing 100 connection requests a week, guess what? Each one takes about 5 seconds. So it's not a big deal, or not 5 seconds, like 10 to 15 seconds. Point is, it's not a lot of time. From those 100 connection requests, if you're doing alum first, you should be seeing at least between 20 and 30% of those people accept your connection request. So you're going to be getting about 20 to 30 new connections every single week. Let me repeat that. That's every single week. You should be having 20 to 30 new connections. Now, what do you do after that? Do you message them on LinkedIn? No, because people don't even read their emails half the time. When you have a connection on LinkedIn, you have their emails 95% of the time, because you can go to the contact information. You can grab it off. You should be bringing that contact to an email, thanking them for the connection, short message, say thanking, and trying to get them on a phone call. And then having some sort of software, whether it's a Boomerang or Right Inbox, something like this. This is what we use in our program. We have a piece of software we subscribe everyone to that makes it easy to make sure once you send that initial email, you put a reminder on it 1 week later to follow up with a second template. And then once they ignore you again for the second time, which guess what? About 90% of the people will still ignore you even though they're alums, because they're busy. You send a second follow-up, so the third email, the second follow-up about 3 weeks later after that. What that ends up doing, that second follow-up actually ends up converting a lot more people to actually hop on a phone call with you. And so from the initial 100 in 1 week, you're usually going about 30 in terms of people that will connect with you. From there, you're usually getting about 3 phone calls a week that will eventually get on a call. So it basically is, you can think of it as a funnel. The people who are most likely to get on a phone call are usually the people who are going to be most helpful to you in general. You can find mentors this way. You can get incredible advice for free. And so it's an amazing kind of process. It's a lot of work, but the time isn't actually the connection requests and all this stuff. It's actually the phone calls, and those can initially be very intimidating. But if you do enough of them, they actually start becoming really fun, and they help you actually develop your story. They help get you advice and all this stuff. In terms of how else to prepare, I would definitely be studying our interview course. shameless plug, WSO interview course, IB interview course. But basically, you want to make sure you have a couple things down pat. Number one, the technicals. So basics, not just the basics on accounting and valuation, but more advanced M&A and LBO questions. And then on the behavioral side, you want to make sure not to underestimate this. You have obvious ones like, why IB, tell me about yourself, which you need to have very polished. But then on top of that, you should be having at least 7 stories prepared prior that you can pull from when you're asked kind of trickier behaviorals, like what's your biggest regret in life? Tell me about a time you worked with data. What's the time you worked in a team and there was conflict with a peer? These are the types of questions. If you're actually thinking on the fly, you've lost. You should be having stories you can map to and be confident doing that. And so then once you put in that pre-work, that's pretty critical. Studying the technicals, getting your stories all polished, getting your why and all that all polished. Actually drilling with mock interviews. So if we had a Highview question earlier today talking to the camera to get that awkward out. Actually doing live mock interviews with peers or with other mentors, I think is a really wise use of time. And I usually suggest a minimum of 6 mock interviews before you do your real one, so that you can really figure out where your weak points are. And hopefully you get somebody who's going to be honest with you, not just a family member saying, Stephen, that's great, you sound so good. You want actually somebody to be critical to you, because slight nuances in terms of how you're phrasing things and how you're presenting yourself can make a big difference in terms of the impression you're making. Let's see what else we have here. Get a drink of water here. Comment from IG. Let's see here. I'm sorry, I'm just reading some of the questions. Okay, so yeah, in terms of the odds calculator I had mentioned earlier, I think I'll put it up here. WSO.tiny.us/calculator should lead you. It's a tiny URL, should lead you to it. If you want to play around with it and see what your odds are, or what your odds would be with different GPAs, different schools. Would you need a visa or not? Or how many people are you networking? It takes all these factors into account and gives you a rough percentage. And by the way, the odds calculator will give you to 2 decimal places. It's a rough estimate. It doesn't mean that you can't make it if it says you only have a 5% chance. It's just taking the pure data you're giving. And by the way, the first question it asks you is like, are you only targeting elite boutiques and bulge brackets, or any IB or any high finance? Very different percentages depending on how you answer that first question. Because if you are from a super non-target, you say, I'm only targeting elite boutiques and bulge bracket banks. Yes, your odds are already pretty crushed. And so just keep that in mind. And you can play with it. You can run different scenarios and try to see how the odds come out. Yeah, Derek RH27 on Insta. So you're telling me there's a chance. There's always a chance, Derek. There's always a chance. I never say never. I just try to handicap it and be straight with people, so they're not they're having a plan B and able to get themselves. So some of the students that are super motivated or hear about banking late or their high finance careers late, I typically try to guide them towards things like transaction advisory services, where you're still going to be getting that valuation and those financial modeling skills. FLDP programs, or typical rotation programs that are Fortune 500s. If you need a visa, you're an international student in the U.S. and it's a little bit harder to get. A lot harder to get. I typically will guide you towards obviously the larger firms, but sometimes asset management and or financial FDP programs that are a little bit more open to sponsoring. Let's see what else we have here going on. Oh yeah. So this kind of, AJ has a similar question here that I just mentioned. I'm targeting UK IB summer analyst roles. If I don't get offered, what's the best option that might help me get an IB later? It's also something value in IB. Yeah, I would say deal advisory, transactions. Corporate finance, more transaction advisory services, or sometimes it's called deal advisory. At a Big Four is typically a very good place to hide out and develop skills that are valued. And I can tell you, it's very common for banks to pull from those groups when they need somebody off cycle. Let's see, here we go. Comment from Instagram. Investment banking full-time recruiting for 2025 now that interim recruiting season is over from Target MBA in the US. Well, technically, MBA recruiting is not, well, it's over if you haven't been invited to the first round. It is. We have somebody in the academy. She's a Wharton MBA. She has JP, literally in the next 2 days, she has JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, B of A, and UBS. Oh, and she got Nomura too. She has 6 first rounds. She does need a visa, so it's she isn't able to get into so many like middle market rounds. But for your situation, I guess if you didn't get those first rounds and you're at a target MBA, then yes, it is kind of over here. Background in engineering and construction. Should I focus on real estate IB roles? Is it good to start networking in January for full-time roles in 2025? How should I go about networking, keep it informational? Yeah, I would keep it informational. I would definitely try, like I mentioned earlier in the stream, widening the top of your funnel, getting on a lot more calls, looking at regional boutiques. If you don't need a visa, it's a huge advantage. Basically, and you're willing to move anywhere in the US, ideally, you can dramatically improve your odds by willing to go to smaller firms that maybe may not be on these very rigid hiring cycles. And so given that you're a target MBA, you'll probably get good looks and get into interview process. And I assume your alumni base is really strong, so I'd be trying to get on as many calls as possible. I don't know in terms of like what your situation is, why you didn't get any first rounds on if you're at a target MBA for banking. Maybe you weren't networking early and often enough, or the coffee chats didn't go as well. But yeah, that's absolutely, you should be networking and keeping it informational right now for full time. Yes. Antar asks, I'm an incoming junior at a non-target going to a bulge bracket for sales and trading. I realized I want to do IBD. Please tell me when to recruit for full-time analyst position. What kind of firm should I target? Should I approach lateraling from the summer internship to IBD at the same firm? When should I start networking for a full-time position? Thank you. Antar, you got to be a little bit careful here. You're at a bulge bracket, incoming junior, non-target. You want IBD. If you are too aggressive at your firm, it could mean that you're not going to get the return offer. I assume when you say going to a bulge bracket for sales and trading, I assume you mean for your summer internship. So you want to make sure, number one, that you get a return offer. It's much easier to lateral and network for full-time analyst positions if you have a return offer. If you don't get that return offer, even if it's sales and trading, then it's much harder to do, because then people think there's something wrong. And so what I would suggest is, assuming you don't need a visa, what kind of firms you should target? You should target any firms that have decent deal volume or decent deal flow, whether it's lower middle market all the way up through the elite boutiques. And should I approach lateraling for the summer internship to be at the same firm? I'd be very careful. Definitely having coffee chats and talking with people on IBD is fine, but I wouldn't be overly aggressive there. I would try to focus most of your networking on the outside, because it can be a little bit risky. Again, your main focus should be on networking with people in sales and trading, looking happy there and getting a return offer there, so you have some sort of safety net there. It can be done, the transition from sales and trading to IBD. It's just a little bit touchy at the same firm. If they see you're running to have all your coffee chats with people in IBD all the time, they're going to understand. They're going to think, oh, Antar doesn't want this, or and that would not be a good situation. When should you start networking for a full-time position? Right at the start of the summer, like now, because the more people you know and the more seeds you plant now. It's people so funny. It's like networking is not a transaction. It's not a transaction of like, okay, I networked with you. Can I have the interview now, or can I have the full-time offer now? That's not how it works. It's not how it works. Again, you're building relationships. How long did it take you to have a best friend? How long did it take you to have your best group of friends? How much stronger is your group of best friends than it was when you first started? How about the friend you've had for 20 years versus the friend you just met? It's different. It's a different level of relationship. And so I always say the earlier you can be networking, the more seeds you can plant earlier in your career, earlier in your college stint or university stint, the better off you're going to be in terms of building actual, real, meaningful relationship that don't feel transactional. And so that's what I would say in terms of that. Let's see what else we have. I'll try to do one more. Yes, I'm telling you, there's a chance. There's always a chance. I don't know what your situation is, Derek, but yes. Well, lots of questions. So this is an interesting question about higher views. I've heard that higher views are graded by AI. Is it true? And if so, what aspects does it look for? Let me just say that because of a lot of bias that can be introduced by AI, a lot of these AI video interview places actually are now only allowed to take a transcript from your spoken words. So does that mean you can have a clown nose on and a wig and dance around while you're delivering a great why JP Morgan answer? To get through the first screening, probably, because they literally can't take the video in many cases for these banks because of they're worried about liability. So does that mean that there isn't a human reviewing the scores that are highest post? Probably what it means is for the people who they take the transcript, that is potentially scored. So for example, if I'll give you an example. So if they ask you about, how you work in teams, and so you're delivering an answer there, the AI score could potentially give some sort of indicative rough score based on the fact that you are using I a lot in the answer or using we in the answer. Now that's one example, but point being, I think what's much more important is that you're comfortable, you're giving answers that make a lot of sense for the specific firm, shows that you've done your research. Because what I think happens is the recordings are given to everybody, but I think a lot of them are never even looked at. And I think what ends up happening is for the people that have networked, for the people that have very strong CVs, those two, that group, and the intersection of those two groups, those are the people then they go look at the higher views and decide, okay, which group of those people, so strong CV and networked, do they want to actually invite for a real in-person first round interview. So what I'd say is don't worry about the AI. I think if anything, you definitely don't want to be think of how would a human interpret this? If you're looking down at a screen, like you have answers written off to the side, that just looks bad in general. So really try to have good eye contact like this and talking to the camera. And that's why I strongly suggest that you actually record yourself several times doing these types of video interviews. The reason I'm not looking straight in the camera is I'm looking at the screen so I can see all of your comments. Let's see. I think I'm going to call it, guys. It's over a half hour. Don't want to lose my voice. I have an office hours later today. So thanks again for joining. I'll try to do this more frequently. So any of you want to join again, I really appreciate all of you joining. Sorry I couldn't get to everybody's questions, but definitely we'll be back again and do this more frequently for 2024. Talk soon. Bye, everybody.